set, is that what you're saying?
Yep. All right, look at that. The video, though, is no bueno. Somebody bumped into it just now.
Oh, man. Where's Surreal when you want to blame him for stuff?
Yeah. Okay, no, I think I was just my...
If I put this inside the shirt more... Like,
Oh, yeah. That still works.
Will I still...
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. What's up, everybody? Thank you, everyone who joined us in person. Feel free to stick around for this. To everyone who's watching live on YouTube, we're watching this later. My name is Elias Benjelloun, and today I'm excited and really honored, honestly, to be able to sit down and speak to one of the movers and shakers here in this community, Jon Stevenson.
Mover and or shaker. Sometimes not both.
Well, I'll try not to, I'm sure this is one of those conversations where we could talk for 3 or 5 hours.
Easily.
I don't want it to, but I want it to be packed with good information,
okay.
Of course. And so I'm going to attempt to give a bit of your bio, and then you can kind of fill in the blanks, okay? I'm going to pull up some specific parts of your bio for us to be able to talk about it, okay? And so, John, you were born and raised here in the historic West Side.
Yep. Well, no, born in Detroit, moved here when I was a month old.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
So raised, on the West Side, yeah.
Nice. Okay, good. Well, raised in the historic West Side. This is your neighborhood. You grew up here. You became a firefighter, and you served in the fire service 27-ish years.
Yep.
At the end of that career, you're assistant fire chief. So you're in the leadership, part of that 9 executive board leadership of the fire council. There's probably some kind of gap for you to fill with us, and then you got reconnected with your childhood classmate / community leader collaborator, Bo Bernhard, who we all know has done a lot of great stuff in this community, tapped you to work with us at TBI. And I'm gonna go back to one other thing. You also played a pivotal role during the Vegas Strong moment here.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of the areas I wanted to make sure we talk about, but could you fill in the gaps?
Sure. So, firefighter, for about 2 years, then I became a firefighter paramedic for another 5 years. Then I made fire captain of one of the top, test takers on that one. Made fire captain, and then about 2-3 years later, my battalion chief. So the way the structure works is you have fire chief, deputy chief, assistant chief, battalion chief, captain. Right? And the captain is in charge of the fire station. They basically run. If it's more than one captain, they share running of the station. But typically, you see a captain on either a fire engine or a fire truck.
Okay.
So there's always one captain on there. And so when I was a captain, my battalion chief kind of browbeat me into test for the battalion chief spot. I was happy at captain. He was like, nope, you got to do it. And so he kind of browbeat me into doing it. He's kind of older brother figure, so I listened. And so I became battalion chief over training. And then after battalion chief of training, then I became a battalion chief in suppression. And what that is that while a captain might supervise one station, a battalion chief in suppression or operations, which are kind of interchangeable, they supervise 6 fire stations.
Okay.
So I supervise 6 fire stations in the west end of town. And so
West End, as in
like
kind
the
of Summerlin.
Area, kind of Summerlin area, yeah. And so for the city of Las Vegas, there's 3 battalions. County at the time had 3 battalions. North Las Vegas had 2, and Henderson had 2 battalions as well.
Yeah.
So not a ton of battalion chiefs for the entire city, but while a captain may be responsible for their crew, at a fire, a battalion chief is responsible for all the crews at a fire. So I was the one saying, you're doing fire attack, you're doing roof division, you are doing rescue, the whole shooting match. I ran big incidents.
How long were you in that role as a battalion
From
chief?
2010. So on the training side, it was from 2007 to 2010, and then from 2010 to 2016, I was battalion chief.
Okay.
Where I then made assistant chief, and so the backstory on that is I didn't want to do that either.
Yeah.
And so but I agreed because other people kind of pushing me into it. So I agreed to interview for it, and I did. I interviewed, and I got along with the chief well. But then when he and I spoke, he goes, do you want to do this? And I like, kind of not really. But then I told him a biblical story. I reminded him rather because he knew it. And I said, I asked Chief, do you remember the story of Jonah? Jonah and the whale. And he's like, refresh my memory. I said, well, God tells Jonah, that he wants him to go to Nineveh, because, to let them know that if they don't repent, there's going to be judgment.
Yeah.
And so the point then was that God wanted Jewish Jonah to go to the pagan Ninevites and tell them to kind of clean it up some or else. Well, Jonah didn't want to go, because the Jews and the Ninevites, they bumped heads. And so where Jonah was supposed to go was 500 miles to the east in Turkey. He ended up going 1,500 miles to the west to get away from it.
Okay.
And so he ends up in, on the far end, of the continent. Ends up, so the rest of the story is he's in a boat trying to sail away, get even further away. Big storm. He says, throw me overboard, and then he's swallowed by a whale, saves the whale for 3 days, spit up, and then he goes to Nineveh after all.
Yeah.
And then when he gets to Nineveh,
the whale spits him out closer to Nineveh.
No. Whale spit him out there, so he had to.
Oh, okay.
Now you got to do 2,000 miles.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
And so he has to trek his way all the way to Nineveh. And he does that. He does in fact preach to the Ninevites, and this is recorded in history. This is one of the historical transformations in a culture, and it's been tracked by like anthropologists and historians, all that stuff. And so he was still kind of mad about that though, because he said, "I knew you'd forgive them," and so God kind of chastised him, like, what are you getting all mad about that?
Yeah.
So anyway, the whole point behind the story was this: I told the fire chief, I said, "Chief, fire administration might be my Nineveh. It's a place I don't necessarily want to go to.
Yeah.
But I may make a big difference if I do go. So if you think you want me because I can make a difference, then take me. Otherwise, I'm not pining for the spot at all.
Yeah.
And so he picked me. And so first I oversaw operations. So now I'm in charge of all the fire stations.
Right.
In the city of Las Vegas, and ran that for a while. But then the department was looking to embark in a different direction. So let me back up. You asked about the October 1 shooting.
Yeah. 2017.
Yeah. So right before then, I transferred over from the assistant chief of operations, where I oversaw all the fire stations, to assistant chief of medical services, because what that role was going to be is the fire. Las Vegas Fire and Rescue was being intentional about wanting to insert itself into community issues like mental health and drug addiction and homelessness and all those other issues. And the reason why is because any one of those patients, any one of those clients weren't calling their case manager.
Yeah.
They're calling us.
Right.
They're calling 911 for their emergencies and like. And so what my role, transitioned into was somebody who would, basically be the new connection of the fire department to the homelessness space, the workers in the homeless space, to the people in the addiction space, to the people in the mental health space. And so I was like, look, we can help. And so that was my new role. And so I took that spot in mid 2017. So when the October 1 shooting came, I was texting. I had just finished playing. It was Friday night. I was playing indoor soccer. I was heading home, and I had my phone starts pinging, like crazy. But I couldn't make out what it was saying. So it was just saying something along the lines of multiple units heading to the strip area. And I wasn't sure what that was all about. I thought maybe it was like a bus rollover or something like that, because we didn't know. So I texted the deputy chief over Clark County Fire. And I was like, hey, because the number of texts had me a little concerned, I texted him like, hey, do you need help with anything? And he goes, I need all the help I can get. So then I started making my way down, and then I'm listening on the radio, all that's going on, like, oh, this is really serious. And so I came from Summerlin, and when I got to the 15, and I saw a convoy of ambulances going down the 15, I was like, oh man. So I make my way around. And then once I arrived on scene, they wanted me to be in charge of North Division. And so when there's an incident, it's kind of broken down to either groups or divisions. If you're in charge of a group, then you're in charge of just the people, and a function. So I might be a fire attack group or a rescue group, and so it's not geographically bound or anything like that. But when you have a division, you've got a geographical area, and then you're responsible for everything that happens in that area. Well, I was made North Division, which was the area right in front of Hooters, and that's where just about half of all the victims were walking that way.
Yeah, this is maybe like literally half a mile away from the incident.
Exactly. And when I got there were still hundreds of people, limping, shoes on, shoes off, bloody, walking through. and I had, I had like some 18 ambulances, so I had 18 ambulances, about half a dozen FBI SWAT, another half dozen Metro SWAT, and about maybe a dozen or 14, fire units, all reporting to me.
Wow.
And so, one of the things that where we got a lot of credit for is we were kind of stuck for a second there because we kept getting reports that there's a shooting victim in the New York, but where? We don't know. The shooting victim in the MGM, where? We don't know. And the problem is, MGM or New York is its own city.
Yeah.
If you don't know, that's a lot of spaces to not know.
Right.
And so our poor dispatchers were just getting pummeled with call after call after call, and inability to get any more direction because a lot of the calls were coming from security, who was just relaying the message.
Oh, wow.
And so
not enough detail.
Exactly. So what I decided, and I notified command and said, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deploy my units, into the, because I was in charge of MGM, Tropicana, and MGM, Tropicana. There's a third one close by. I can't remember which one. Anyway, what I said I was going to do is I was going to deploy my units. I wasn't going to wait to get more information about where the victim might be. I sent them out, and I said, look, if nothing else, just sweep floors. So check the bottom floor, first floor, second floor. If you come across a victim, let us know, and then we can get it rolling, because otherwise we'll stay here all day, all night waiting. And so that was a decision that got all the rest of the dominoes falling. And so then we were able to deploy all of our units out there, and then everything just kind of sped up.
Great.
And got going quickly. Yes.
Were there, did they discover victims in that process?
At least not in mine, not with mine, because there were three divisions. There was North Division, and then there was a East Division, and maybe a South Division.
Okay.
I would have expected my division, to come across one, but what it really was is the majority of the victims were all inside the grounds still. And so, but they were still, getting the, Mandalay Bay, completely searched and the like. So it was tricky to get everything, our arms wrapped around everything in real time.
Right.
Because, we just didn't know, if there was another shooter somewhere and the like. And so we had to tread carefully with protection along the way just to make sure that there wasn't a multiple shooter thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of reports that were being made at the time, right? Because whether it was shots of echoes, and it was also a mix of people's panic, that there's, and also the volume of destruction that was created definitely made it very plausible that there's multiple gunmen on site. Exactly.
Because if you call 911 from Mandalay Bay, and I call 911 from New York,
there's two separate incidents.
Right, and so they think there's a shooter at Mandalay Bay, which there was, and they think there's a shooter at New York.
Which there wasn't.
No, there was not.
Yeah.
But we didn't know.
Yeah.
Because there would be multiple reports from people. There's a shooter, and it came from New York, or it came from the Tropicana.
What are some of the moments in your career that helped you prepare for that? Was there anything that came close?
I would say I was lucky in that I had a strict battalion chief, and to back up a little bit, our promotional process, was really, really rigorous. I mean, we had to know damn near, to at 100% level, 9 different textbooks.
Yeah.
And we had to practice, incidents over and over, because they were on the assessment center. And so you had to practice every kind of incident, whether it was a house fire, or whether it was a hazmat incident, or it was a high-rise incident. So that really got me prepared as a captain. And then when I made battalion chief, being overtraining, I was teaching the stuff.
Yeah.
So the reps that I got from teaching, incident command and the like, really prepped me for when I became a battalion chief on the floor. I just got to flex those muscles in practice. And then on top of that, when you're helping other people promote to captain or battalion chief, it's a refresher that way too. So it was a constant amount of practice and preparation. And then I also participated in what was called the SNUC committee, which was the Southern Nevada Unified Command Committee. And what that was supposed to do is, because once upon a time, county and city, North Las Vegas, Henderson, we did not share policies. We did our own thing, and if you came to help, okay, if you gotta, kind of thing. And we kind of figured it out. But we decided then is that no, we're going to try to, as best we can, get shared policies for fires and EMS calls and like that. So I was part of that group that was, kind of stitching everything together.
Yeah.
And like an active shooter was one of those things. So it was another way where I got immersed, in thinking about active shooter incidents and the like. So when I got there, it was like, okay, this is all the stuff we practiced and we talked about and we argued about.
You're right.
And all that stuff. And so, but I bring all that up to say that what we did that night made fire and police personnel across the country proud, because it was like the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. It didn't go so great. And so they were taking a lot of flack for it. In
terms of how rapidly they responded and rescued the survivors.
Yeah, and I think they were kind of I would say unfairly maligned, but maligned nonetheless about organization and execution of the whole operation. Because they're hard. They're really, really difficult. They're super difficult.
And that's what I wanted to go a little further on with you about, because with all of the trainings, I mean, I imagine there's a certain level of exposure to loss of life in the work that you're doing, right? Like, there's no way around it. Whether as an EMT, going into somebody's home, or in this, tragic night. And, at the intensity of a tragic night like that, or in Orlando, I could totally see, whether it was a cop or a firefighter or whoever it was, to be shooken, or, struggle with, processing that and staying centered enough to solve whatever needs to be solved. So how did you navigate that? How did you help your teams navigate that?
So, what's weird is lots of little things that have nothing to do with anything can sometimes have a lot to do with something.
Yeah.
So from the time I was 13 years old up to about 21, I went back and with Jazzy J.
Okay, yeah.
And that's when I started rapping, and the like. And so I would rap, in like big crowds, like assemblies at the school, and we rapped, me and my partner, Silky D, we rapped against Candyman and his group. You remember the song Knockin' the Boots? It was the LA versus Las Vegas rap contest. And so we were representing Vegas.
That's so funny.
And so there's something about, and plus when I DJ'd massive, dances and the like. I had a mix show, on 97.1 and 88.1 at once upon a time. All of my team. So I was out there learning how to handle myself and be composed under high pressure, kind of thing. So I learned that, and I cultivated an ego from it.
Yeah, I bet.
I cultivated quite the ego. And so when it came time, to think on my feet and be able to speak and communicate clearly, it was second nature for me.
Yeah.
I was not flummoxed by opening up the mic and, and saying what I got to say. It was not all that different for me than days of rapping and the like. But again, the training, and I was practicing constantly. I was constantly, and there's kind of a reason for that, in that there are detractors. If you're a woman, a minority in the fire service or the police department, there are detractors. People who just do not want to see you do well at all. Fortunately or unfortunately, I pay a lot of attention to those folks.
Yeah.
And they're not even a majority by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
Not even close.
Are they
haters?
People who are supposed to report to you, or managers, or you see?
Well, when I was coming up, it started from the early, because I was too dumb or too immature to not know to close my mouth, about political issues.
Okay.
So I'm. Second Amendment says this.
Right.
You tell a bunch of firefighters, what the actual Second Amendment is supposed to be throughout historical.
Yeah. Tell them about the Supreme Court case deciding the presidential election at the time.
Right. So I get it Oh, I was doing Facebook political,
Oh, no.
badly before there was a Facebook.
Yeah.
And so it's a quick way
Yeah.
to find yourself. And so what happens is, there's a lot of subjectivity, in the fire service.
Yeah.
To whereas, if you're 6'2", funny, dimple chin, or you can cook really good, then you can't do wrong on a fire. And if you did something wrong, that's just one of those things. It was just that hot. It was just that chaotic. That wasn't you. On the other hand, if you're not one of the favorite people, you can smash the whole thing and like be awesome all the way around. They're like, oh well, nah. They'll find some manufacturing. And so I knew that I had talked myself into a dilemma to where now I have to know my stuff.
Yeah.
I've got to know it up one
Right.
side and down the other because I've animated, the hater class.
Well, and you're living with them too. Is
Right.
the other thing.
Right.
That makes the dynamic.
And they don't
way
tell you to your
harder.
face.
Yeah,
You hear about yourself, through roundabout
no.
means,
Yeah.
And so and I was teaching classes, in the fire service too. I was teaching, HR related classes
Okay.
and all that stuff. And they'd be in class.
Oh man.
And so, but I learned to use, the hater class as motivation and fuel to really, really, really put myself at the sharpest I could possibly be.
Good. And in terms of living with other firefighters, I mean, is that something that goes all the way to the top, like everybody, or at what point do you stop living in the house?
So when
At
you
station.
so battalion chief is the highest level of supervision in suppression, or being on the floor.
Okay.
And so after that, assistant chief.
You
you're
got
at headquarters.
6 of them, right? So you're just bouncing around every week to different ones?
No.
or-
So there was 3 of us
Yeah.
on
Okay.
shift at a given time.
Okay.
And I had, my permanent spot was, up in the Summerlin area.
Okay.
And so now if there was a callback or overtime or something like that, whatever, or a trade, I may go to Battalion 4, which is the Northwest, or Battalion 1, which is downtown.
Okay.
But my main station was Station 2 over on Charleston and Durango.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And so, I mean, so you were in assistant fire chief for how many years?
From 16 to, when did I retire? Which is 21? 21.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you lived in the station for 20 years.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that is really cool.
What's really cool
Yeah.
is I was a chief for over half my career. That doesn't happen.
Right. No.
That does not happen. I was an officer for all but 7 years of my whole career. So it's 20 years as an officer.
Yeah.
And over half of that was as a chief. That just doesn't happen.
Why do you think that happened in your case?
Haters,
Yeah.
and ego.
Yeah.
And
It was a mix of both of those things at once?
it was that, and again, I was browbeaten
Yeah.
into pushing for spots and the
Right.
like. I really attribute a lot of it to the fact that I had more of an education not related to the fire service than people who were testing alongside me. So having that,
I see.
more education in sociology and history, and being a better writer, a better researcher, better reasoner, all this like that, it gave me an advantage.
Yeah.
When I was testing against, other guys who maybe just only had, a fire service education.
Right.
And so, education was a huge lift, for me that way.
Absolutely.
And again, so, being too responsive to my haters, and also being responsive to people who want to push me at higher levels, even if I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And so that's what came together. I'm kind of like that feather in Forrest Gump. Remember?
Okay.
Yeah. Remember? So she opens the book and the feather's just floating around, or
Yeah.
whatever, and it's supposed to be a metaphor, for life, where you just kind of carry wherever the wind takes you. I'm kind of like that feather on Forrest Gump. I just kind of float wherever.
Okay.
And you'll hear about that. You'll see what I'm talking about as we go further in my biography.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go. Let's go further there because but before what I guess you're not floating in a vacuum. right? Like
No.
you're floating in the context of everything else that's happening. And then even you're like a feather that's also like a mini spaceship because you create space. Like all the spaces we go into, somehow we're impacting that space. And you, John, are someone who intentionally thinks about how do I create space for other people to be nurtured and grown up and whatnot. And so now you got pushed into this role. I can only imagine that that's something that you were trying to do is create space for other members of the fire service. And you talked about being responsive to your haters and stuff like that. Can you talk about forget the haters for a second, but talk about what you did that was different in terms of creating space for the next generation of fighters.
So what I would always teach, in the leadership classes is that to be an effective leader, there's a first commandment. And the first commandment is thou shalt give a damn.
Okay.
And so
Nice.
what I was arguing to them is that the more you care about your people, like genuinely care about your people, the more the right decisions by them just kind of click. They just kind of come to you. Whether that be confronting them, or encouraging them, or warning them, like, hey, maybe this isn't your bag, or consoling them. There's lots of teachings on servant leadership and the like, which I'm a fan of. I'm a total fan of. But I would just argue, what I would suggest is, if you get that first commandment right, if you really genuinely care about your people up and down, and I'm not the furthest away from a narcissist you'll ever find. I'm much more in the way of selfless. I'm more shepherd-like than domineering type, whatever. And so I did that. Like, for example, I had more captains and chiefs promote out of my out of my ranks than anybody else. It wasn't even close.
Wow.
Was not even close, because I empowered them. And sometimes it looks like empowerment. Sometimes it looks like just being lazy and like you do it.
Okay.
But whatever it is, it just kind of worked out to where more and more people felt empowered. I had honest dialogue, with my crews, like, how am I doing? What do you see? How do you see this issue? How do you see that problem? But it was always honest, and so, being careful, about your people, like really caring about them, and then committing to honesty, no matter what, committing to honesty with them, and transparency. It is transformative, and so I made space for them, that way, and so that became more of a core tenet of what my leadership style was and my personality, is. And as you've seen, how that transfers, the more you care about people, the more you can figure out stuff for them. Or the more you can be honest with them.
Right.
And but it does not come together unless you truly give a damn about it. It just doesn't.
And it can be hard, right, for some folks to give a damn about people who they can't see themselves into it. Right? Like if they don't look the same or have the same story. I mean, this is a huge thing. And so I know you look for ways to intentionally create space and, find ways to connect with people who may not have the same background as yourself. Now, you're entering the fire service in 1998 or ish, right? And you're
94.
94. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My bad. 94. And that's a time when in America, we didn't have, as much diversity in our professional spaces, right? I'd imagine the fire service was like that. And then, so you might find yourself, I may be wrong, so you could correct me, but you may have found yourself being one of the first African Americans or one of the few African Americans.
Actually, my dad was one of the first African Americans.
Really?
So he came on in '71. And there was one other, black guy, Monroe Williams.
Okay.
Brilliant black man, who was, he was a firefighter. I think he had made captain shortly after my dad came on in '71. So I think Monroe came on in like '68, maybe, and he was the first.
That's amazing.
And then in '71 was my dad and two other, black men. And then about 2-3 years later, we had, Chief Washington and others. So there was kind of a trickling in the '70s.
Yeah. Speak on your dad's journey into the fire service.
So we moved out here in '69 when I'm a month old, and he and my grandfather, who was my mom's father, they were going to go in. Well, my grandfather had a business. He had Lyle's Bail Bonds, which was first black bail bondsman in the state. And as you can imagine, being a black bail bondsman in the mid to late '60s, business was brisk.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
brisk.
In Las Vegas,
And
nonetheless.
exactly. And so, so my dad, who had a high up position, in the union and management or at Chrysler, my grandfather said, "Come out here, we can, do our thing." So we moved out here, in June of '69, and then, reasons I'm not entirely certain, no one really spoke, about it in detail. My dad and my grandfather, it didn't come together, and so, my dad, I think he bartended at the Moulin Rouge, for a bit, and then in '71 he got on with the fire department.
Great.
And so my being in the fire service predates my earliest memories.
Yeah.
And so I was that kid, we'd come to visit my dad at the station and I ran amok.
Yeah.
I'm touching everything and putting on hats and boots. I'm into everything,
Nice.
and I loved it. I was, really proud of my dad, being in the fire service. But the interesting thing is before I got in the fire department, my plan was to go to law school.
Okay.
But my dad's firefighter friends were like, "You need to get in the fire department." I'm like, "No," because my dad's this big,
Yeah.
strong dude, like knuckles that wide,
Oh,
and you
man.
see,
Yeah.
I got the bone structure of a Girl Scout, and so, so thin, thin, wiry guys like that, I can't do that, and so, but then they're like, "No, you really can do it." And then they pointed to this other dude, who was a little smaller than I was, short, just like that. He goes, "He's on, he's doing it, he does a great job." I'm like, "Well, hell, if he can do it, I can do it."
Yeah.
But then the kicker was that they said, if you get on the fire service, you can still go to law school because you can arrange for trades and this, that, and the other. And it's a better career, you'll make more money and have more flexibility than working at Costco.
Yeah.
Okay, so I tested, and it took me 3 tries, to get on. I'm one of the few people that ever get 100% on the oral interviews, and so when I got on, that was that. And so, Dad was proud, because he was up from 71 to 89. He tested for captain a few times, but didn't make. So when he saw his son make captain, then he saw his son make battalion chief, then he saw his son make assistant chief. It had to have felt like a lot of validation because they went through some rough stuff.
Yeah.
They went through some bad stuff.
Almost where I was going was that that they were the ones that went through that fight of integrating the fire service and getting people to live together and be nice with one another, and that created a space for you. Although there's still other stuff you had to go through. How did you help create a space for other people?
Well, like I said before, it was really, empowering them to make decisions. I have a management philosophy that I'm not going to do for you what you can do for yourself. And then part 2 of that is I'm going to push you to be able to expand what you're able to do, for yourself. I just, I didn't let them sit on the laurels, but I also made it to whereas they kind of want it, that autonomy and that expansive space. And there was stuff I disagreed with, and I would even say to them, "Look, I'm not a fan of this particular decision, but I'm going to allow you to make this choice. But if it goes sideways, I'm going to say something about it."
And this is people that report to you?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about people who are your peers or people you report to when you disagree with them?
Yeah, so that happened a lot. And so where I was effective was that, so before I became, a fire captain, my biggest freak out was that I felt like I was a conflict coward. Like I really did not want to, have those hard conversations or engage in conflict.
While you're an officer.
Well, I was making captain.
Oh, okay.
And so I went out and I set out to try to learn everything I could, any books I can about, how to hold people accountable, how to have difficult conversations. And then I came across, 2 really, really critical books. One was called Crucial Conversations by Patterson, Grenny, Macmillan, or something like that. And then there was a companion book called Crucial Accountability. Read them both, even paid for the seminar.
Yeah.
And it was gold for me. And what it teaches you fundamentally is, first off, you can't fix what you can't talk about.
Yeah.
And there's always something to fix.
Right.
And the like. But the second thing is it teaches you is that you can have a disagreement that does not necessarily damage the relationship. You can be right on the issues and right on the relationship. You don't have to be right on the issues or right on the relationship. And so you learn, so I learned tools about being able to sit down, and have a conversation with someone, particularly if they're a supervisor, and say, hey, look, I noticed, you did this, 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 and this, what I saw, what I feel like happened, or my takeaway from that is this, can you see how you see where I'm coming from with that, and so, and I was able to have those conversations, and that wasn't that they necessarily led to agreement.
Yeah.
They didn't by any stretch, but what they did was they kind of softened the ground, for further dialogues, with supervisors and the like.
Yeah.
And I just got better at being able to do that. And so I cultivated a reputation for being the one that if there was something that somebody felt was unfair, on the floor, not even my firefighters. They'd be firefighters in somebody else's battalion. They would come on their off days and say, hey, Chief, did you know that the testing process, this happened? No, I did not. That doesn't seem fair. No, it doesn't. When you talk to the chief, would you please? So I would be the one, going to the fire chief and say, hey, look, I kind of see their point with this, and I think the fire chief recognizing that I had cultivated a skill with being able to, to hold, supervisors accountable to some extent, or have a difficult conversation with supervisors. I think that probably played into why he picked me to be an assistant chief anyway. Yeah. And as an assistant chief, I had to do that a lot.
Oh yeah.
I had to do that a lot. Because some of that is just, I can't let stuff go.
Right. Right.
Like if I see somebody being picked on or messed with or being treated unfairly, I don't have the good sense to let it go. I don't have the political savvy rather to let it go. And if you want to do a job that is heavily infused, with internal politics, external politics, then you really have to be skilled at what you're willing to let go. And I wasn't. If it was regarding somebody else, I just want to. I can take whatever on me. I never sweated that, but I was regularly the person that they come to and say, if you take it to Chief Stevenson, he'll do something about it.
Yeah. And that's a double-edged situation to really create for yourself, because on one hand, in some environments that could be really good. That's okay, we were creating a sergeant at arms person, or maybe a good HR person. On the other hand, though, it's like, how is it that Assistant Fire Chief Stevenson's always coming to us with these issues, right? It's almost like, if I didn't know any better, be thinking that you were an activist in that space, right? And is that fair to say? Like, yeah. So think about that conflict, because that created conflict, right?
Yeah.
For upside and down when you have to come in because somebody brought an issue to you, and you know that it needs to be solved. So you're going to go talk to everybody affiliated with that, and then you do that 50 times over your 2 years there. I know it was a longer time, probably more times than that. It does create maybe a reputation, whether earned or not earned, with the whole organization. So how did you manage that?
You reconcile yourself to say that you're going to lose in some way or another. Yeah. And so you may not be able to pick your wins, but you can pick your losses.
You can.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and I decided that if I may lose on politics, but I won't lose on integrity. So, and a lot of those conversations didn't have a solve in mind. Sometimes it was just like, this was out of line. And
okay.
And let them have it. Because what would happen is, this happened more with the women in the fire service, is that somebody high up in some clique, would do something, kind of foul, or whatever. And it might be a woman, or it might be, somebody who just kind of, lower tiered, in the pecking order, and and then I'd find out about it, and it's on. I'm like, no, you're not doing this, not here, not now. Yeah. And there was one instance in particular when a deputy chief, which was above me, was involved with, a really what I thought egregious, discipline of a female captain. And it was a converging of a lot of different powerful political interests that made her vulnerable and speaking up for her would have invariably put you in conflict, with those political interests. And so, the deputy chief, I thought, was out of line, by going along with, what the socially or politically, powerful clique, wanted, and alienated this female captain who had an impeccable record. I mean, a stellar record. And the thing they picked was foul, and the way they handled it was foul. And and so when I found out about it, I called her and said, hey, how you feeling? And so she, we're talking, whatever. And it ended up being like a 2-hour conversation. She's sobbing, because she could, she could vent to me, and she goes, Chief, I don't want anything done about it. And I said, no, I get that. And so here's what I'll say is, I'm going to say something to them. I'm going to let them know that you're not directing this. I'm doing this on my own principle. And she goes, okay, I'm fine with that, but just I don't want them thinking that I put you up to this. I'm not filing a complaint or like that. I said, don't worry about that. And so then, the next day, the very next day, because what had happened is it had happened on the incident was related to the October 1 shooting.
Okay.
The discipline she got, which I thought was foul, was, that weekend. And I found out about it, I think I found out about it that Monday.
Okay. And
then Tuesday, I let rip on the entire executive staff, about it, and just let them have it. And so things like that, I cultivated, and to some extent it is kind of an activist bent, but I cultivated a reputation for being more principled than political, being more principled than money-driven or status-driven, or like that. It was the principles of right and wrong, and I was reliable for that. And so, I when things got bad, it came to me. It came to me because they knew I'd say something or do something.
When you say let him have it, what does that look like?
So it's still in the context of a civil conversation with the idea of trying to, salvage a relationship.
Yeah.
But I spoke honestly to it, and so, like in that example, I brought up the issue, and I brought up the fact that somebody who wasn't even related to that issue wanted to do a very high discipline for somebody who didn't really do anything wrong. She, went to, let her battalion chief know what she was going to do, and he was asleep, and so she told his aide, and she was gone 15, 20 minutes, and so didn't miss a call. She arranged for a backup because there was an extra paramedic, that day, being preceptor, who was also an acting captain. So no unit was down. Every unit was staffed. She went and she had to take care. So there was somebody who was at the October 1 shooting and called and said, "Can you come pick me up?" And this captain didn't know what had happened yet. And so, she just thought it was like something bad happened at a club or something like that. Goes, pick her up, bring her back, gone for all of 19 minutes. But then the crews wanted to manufacture some kind of, offense about it. Like, I can't believe this happened, and then they just kind of, it was like a Lord of the Flies kind of thing piling on. And so the battalion chief she was working for didn't have a problem with it. And so they had another battalion chief who was a regular battalion chief, threw the book at her, with the deputy chief sitting there, which doesn't happen either. And so, which is all the more crushing for her that it was like this groundswell. And so when I had the conversation, I told him, you didn't follow the process, whatever, and you threw the book, at one of our best employees for something that she had covered, and there was no damage done, no harm done. She was as conscientious as she could possibly be, and this happens all the time.
And through the book, this is not a physical throwing the book, right?
No,
this is like in terms of bringing all 17 different policies and pulling them together.
Right.
To
so in discipline levels,
it.
there's counseling, which is like a verbal, discussion. Okay. Step one is, okay, I need to write down our discussion, and it stays in your file for about 3 months. Step two is, we had a serious talk about this, and this stayed in your file for 6 months. And then because after step two is either suspension or termination. Yeah. So they decided to give her a step two on this, which put her on the precipice, of
getting fired.
Right.
Wow.
And this person who's never, anything we asked her for ever, volunteer for this, volunteer for that, never let us down, never been in trouble ever, but when they spoke up, as a group,
Yeah.
they got what they wanted,
Yeah.
and
And there's a lot of political interest groups associated with that because the city council, I mean, this
no,
something
just,
that
I'm talking about
people,
just within the
oh,
organization.
not even,
So there's cliques in that.
oh, so even within the organization, it wasn't like there was pressure coming from the city or
Nope,
from
nope,
the public
nope,
because somebody saw that and wanted
nope.
to, no, it came internally.
It was all internal.
Oh, wow.
All internal.
So it makes it worse, actually.
It does.
Yeah.
It totally does. And so, but yeah, there's cliques of people who kind of coalesce together and can make noise together.
Yeah.
And they can, who are able to put pressure, on like the union or like which transfers up, and so all that stuff. But I told them this was completely foul, completely out of line, completely unjust. And then when the deputy chief countered, well, she didn't want to file a complaint about it. And I was like, that proves nothing. All that proves is that she wanted to, get past this as fast as she could. That doesn't prove that your decision, was the correct one.
Exactly.
It just proves that she really, 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 really wants to get this behind her, regardless of whether it was done right or wrong.
Right.
And I'm telling you right now, it was done wrong.
Yeah.
And so, but that is a leadership tenet that I've cultivated, and I stand by it to this day.
What about the union and your relationship with the union? Did you ever get engaged in that direction?
No, I was never. No, I didn't get involved in the union so much. Now I'm a labor guy all day, because I do believe in the principles of organized labor, because I am absolutely convinced that organized labor represents a counterbalance, to the wealthy corporations and the like. There is no counterbalance otherwise. And so if the common person is going to have any voice, or any rights or like that, it's going to come from for the union space. Now, it does not mean that all union presidents take seriously the moral underpinnings of being in a union. Some of them see it as another path for power that feeds their narcissism. And I have seen narcissistic union presidents.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And anywhere there's ability to control power or to mass power, it seems that's like the honey to attract the bears, that want to hold on to power in that way. But yeah, I agree with you. I've met union folks on both sides of that are genuinely doing this to take care of their families and to help other people take care of their families and to hold companies accountable and have the understanding that, okay, we got to work with these companies, make sure they're successful so we stay successful for generations to come. And then there's folks who don't even care about the underpinnings or how many people have died just for this union movement to exist. And they're like, okay, I become a union president, now I can run for this office and then I could be a senator and then I could, and it's just a terrible thing, but this is not the biggest.
Or maybe they don't even think that far.
Yeah.
The union president, I'm thinking of, all he really wanted to do was just be able to yell at people.
Oh man.
And if they didn't respond, then yell at the fire chief because they didn't respond. And if the fire chief didn't respond, he'd go yell at the city council member.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It was, he was awful, and so.
So you mentioned in your work in the fire service, you were also put in responsibility of how the fire service was in the community through the medical organizations mainly. Could you talk about some of the outcomes that came out of that?
Okay, so two of the program, well, there's a few of them actually. So one of them was going back to my empowering thing. We had a guy who was light duty paramedic, and he had gone to some like a seminar about sex trafficking awareness. Okay. And he thought, Chief, I'd like to try to create a class for our department. And I was like, no, you're gonna go farther than that. We're gonna. This is something you could take a lot further. Yeah. So I pushed him. I said, you need to think bigger with this. You're up for this. And at first he was kind of hesitant about it. Yeah. But I pushed him. He was like, you know what? I can't be. So then I started making connections with him with all the the stakeholders in the juvenile sex trafficking space, and what was the name of the facility? It's over on Mojave and Bonanza, and it was, I can't remember. Anyway,
Shade Tree?
No, this was for youth, and so
okay.
and the name escapes me, but it was it was a county social services building for the youth, and they were excellent. And so I was like, we're making that connection. So I made him, I either brought him connections or I helped him make connections or I pushed him to connections because the goal was going to be, we're going to do a valley-wide, training. We're not doing, just fire department. It's going to be valley-wide.
Yeah.
And we pushed it, and sure as anything, he nailed that.
That's great.
So we ended up having a training, I think about 4,000
Wow.
different personnel, whether they're fire, some police maybe, and I think nurses, nursing school for sure. But we pushed that, and he crushed it.
That's great. And the class was about identifying sex trafficking victims, how to
Exactly.
do intervention.
Exactly. Well, and no one had to be clever about it. So, for example, if
No one had to be clever about it. Okay.
Exactly.
To avoid conflict.
exactly. So what happened is, a medic may show up, and talk to, a young female who's complaining about abdominal pain, right? But every time he asks her a question, she looks over at her boyfriend. How long has your stomach bothering you? Then ask the question. Any possibility you get pregnant? Comes back.
This is what is this trigger? This is like a fear what
Well,
is there? Do you know what that is? Like from
yeah.
a psychology perspective, the need to go look at the abuser to make sure that this is a question that
Right.
what is that?
Well, because they're always afraid of saying the wrong thing because more often than not, the violence is arbitrary and not necessarily connected to anything that they did bad. So usually pimps use arbitrary violence.
Violence is a default thing.
Exactly.
This is just a way
and
of
the
life.
reasons will be arbitrary.
Yeah.
Very, very arbitrary. And once in a while, it'll be connected to something they said or did or something like that. But oftentimes it's just arbitrary, so that you don't have the ability to to feel like you have agency, in it. You are stripped of agency. And the way you do it is you get punished for stuff you did or didn't do, and then, you get punished for stuff you did do, and you get punished for stuff you didn't do.
Yeah.
And so that's that psychology. So what we do is we just have the medics, figure out a way to separate them out. Like, hey, I'm gonna ask you some private questions. I don't want to embarrass her in front of anybody. So you mind, stepping out with my partner? And then they say, hey, are you all right? And that's when they start asking those questions.
Yeah.
If they see a young girl with, with 2 or more cell phones.
That's another sign.
That was like, okay, let me figure out a way to talk to this girl. If they saw them with just a bunch of cash, okay, and so we just started looking for those clues, and then we figured out, because she can call 911, or she or he could call 911 as long as it wasn't law enforcement.
As long as it wasn't law enforment.
Right.
What
So
do you mean?
they were never allowed to call the police for anything.
Because if police shows up and they see that trifecta
Exactly.
situations,
Right.
they're arresting
So
probably both.
if she got beat up, assaulted, or if somebody robbed, stole my TV, you ain't
Not calling the police.
No.
But medical issue,
Exactly.
and so that's why you guys, or as in the fire service and the EMTs, were running into this, sex traffic population more often than the police were. By the time police got involved, it was like too late at that point, or
If they
things were
got
too-
involved, if they got involved at all,
Yeah.
From a 911 call. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that more often than not, law enforcement
Yeah.
becomes, and comes in contact with these folks by way of detective work.
Yeah.
Not by way of a 911 kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
That's my supposition. But we got called,
Yeah.
to them, and so we wanted to train our people on how to
Yeah.
do that. So that's one of the things that I'm really proud of that we put together, because there was never one before.
Yeah.
There was never one in this valley before.
That's great.
So that's one. I also built a thing called a crisis response team,
Yeah.
which was where I put a licensed clinical social worker on a 911 ambulance that would respond to 911 psychiatric emergencies. Now, it was the brainchild of a previous chief named Sarah McRae. It was her brainchild, but I got to carry her vision into fruition. And so the outcomes we had there was, we were able to allow law enforcement to kind of step away from a person who's in psychiatric crisis, and then have somebody who is who at the highest level of expertise for handling those, licensed clinical social workers, be able to do the de-escalation techniques and all that. And so we end up, then we would take them either if they could be medically cleared we took them to a mental health hospital, which kept them from having to sit in an ER waiting for case management. And so
causes conflict for the patients in the ER and for themselves. It's a whole mess.
Exactly. And so we were able to to really get people in the care they needed, and we allowed Metro to not have to be rolling around on the ground, with somebody in a psychiatric emergency.
Right.
And so that was a golden thing. The other one is I built the community paramedic program where I took medics, off the floor, and taught, had them taught junior varsity social worker skills. So not full on, social worker skills, but junior varsity where they were more aware of systems and resources and the like. And originally the idea was to help people who are like high 911 utilizers, because we have people who have called 911 upwards of like 120, 130 times a year.
You know what? I never heard of a high 911 utilizer. So can you explain that?
So yeah, and so what you have is, so we had, maybe you have it's somebody who's a diabetic or somebody who falls a lot, or something along those lines, and they just don't manage their own health, that well. And on top of that, oftentimes they don't have a primary care physician, and so they call over and over. And so we had like, people call like 70, 80, 100, 115 times.
Wow, that's like 4 times a week. It's like every other day.
Well, or 2-3 times a day.
Wow.
And so what we decided was, instead of just doing the same thing over and over, by creating the community paramedic program, we said, let's go visit with these people and let's find out what are the social determinants driving into the high 911 utilizer.
Yeah.
Is it addiction issues? Is it they don't have primary care? Is it transportation issues? Is it that they fall off, with getting the prescription refilled, whatever? Because every time they go to the hospital, they get a new prescription, and so
you might not hear from this in like 20 days.
No. What happens is, so you go to this doctor, you got trazodone for 5 milligrams. Then you go to the next doctor, you got trazodone for 15 milligrams. And then you come back to this one over here, and it's 20 milligrams. And so now you don't know which script is which, and they just get turned around because each time they go, they get a new script or something like that, and so now they're confused. There's prescriptions there everywhere. And so not having that primary care physician,
right?
They were
Somebody
using,
they can go talk to.
They were using the 911 system as their primary care doctor.
Okay, yeah.
So we were able to do huge solves of that. So like, we were able to get people who call like 70, 75 times a year down to like once a year, just by helping them, make those social connections like that. But we also learned a lot about, the social system along the way. To whereas when COVID came, I was working, by that time I built up a partnership with Kathy Thomas, with the city, and she was like a big sister mentor, so she was schooling me on everything. And so when COVID came, my concern was that homeless individuals, there's no way they could go back to a shelter, and have symptoms of COVID. It'll run riot, through there. And so I had a meeting with the health district, I think like March 12th or something like that of 2020. I was like, hey, this could be a problem. And then
this is like literally a week or a day after Governor Sisolak at the time announced the shutdown, right?
I think it was before. It was like 2 or 3 weeks before the shutdown, if I remember correctly. And at the time, the person I was talking to at the health district goes, I don't see it. We think it might be just like the flu. Like, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's not. And so after that meeting, Kathy and I, I was like, Kathy, we can't let this go. And so we set out, to put together a plan. And so I devised what was called the Cashman Isolation and Quarantine Complex over at Cashman Field. And I sketched out, a complete map for how we could get homeless individuals who may be symptomatic or full-on positive, to be able to recover or be observed away from shelters.
Right.
And so we built that up. And so there's about 5,000, in the homeless population. And so we thought, we needed to probably build it for close to 800 at minimum.
Okay.
And so that's what we built. Had the tents and like, and so Kathy and her side from the city, with Lisa Morris, like they got the resources to make that come together. I wrote the plan. for how it works. And we ended up creating an isolation and quarantine facility that the Deputy Secretary of HUD said was one of the best he's seen around the world.
Nice, that's amazing. And so any of this work that you're able to do, how, it's almost like adding another contribution to, the tapestry that is the history of this public service effort. And hopefully you hope that nobody rips off the tapestry, right? Which happens in our work, a lot of work sometimes. But there's also sometimes where that work that you've done can live on without you, whether in the form of publications, case studies, people we mentored, being adopted by other people, other counties, cities, etc. Have you been, able to see any of that from these efforts?
So we continue to have both our programs, the community paramedic.
Oh, good.
And
Today.
Today.
Wonderful.
Yeah, still going strong. And we've had Alameda County, in the Bay Area, they were looking to replicate, what our model was. They might have, I think they went with something different because the resource allocation is different between the different counties and the like. Different in the different jurisdictions. So they brought us out because they wanted to hear about it. They brought out my doctor who oversaw the program because I'd retired by then. But I don't know what they came away with ultimately.
And what about you pointing to some other organizations or other systems that helped inspire this? I mean, anything come to mind?
I think it's just that being in the space, and plus when I was the assistant chief of medical services, I was also appointed to the board of the Nevada Continuum of the Homelessness Continuum of Care Board.
Okay.
So I'm on there with Arash Ghafouri and
amazing.
And I think Michelle Fluen Alexander and Kathy Gibson. So these are the heavy hitters, in the space, and I'm on the board with them. And so I just kept finding out in little increments that what I do, what I know, what I'm affiliated with by way of the fire service is usually fairly welcome as a resource in each of the spaces that I've gone to.
Some of what you're describing to me in terms of reducing the 911, like having a police officer have to deal with folks in psychiatry emergency, for example, or also doing some of that behavior analysis for the determinants for the calls in the first place. It not in exact ways, but it makes me think of public safety committees or what is adopted in some parts of Europe, where there's a kind of a classification of public safety and police officers, right? So you have, in Europe, you rarely have police officers with guns. I think probably none at all.
In Europe?
Yeah,
no,
in some
rare.
part, but even with that being put aside, you have some police officers whose roles are to, talk and work with the homeless or work with folks who are having a psychiatric emergency versus domestic violence, robbery, murder, some of these more violent situations. And now, in the most recent, transition of mayors for New York City, Pam Downey is talking a lot about this, talking a lot about the creation of these this public safety committee or something along those lines. Are you familiar with any of that? No?
No.
Okay. I think that'd be an interesting conversation because I think the work that you're going down with this in terms of splitting up roles and responsibilities to meet specific audiences and to alleviate the resources of the overarching fire service or the police department, I think that's kind of the direction some of these other things are going, but there hasn't been a lot of traction around the world on this yet.
Well, I see two positive outcomes, or potentials for this. Number one, I do think that the council might be kind of a nice idea, for Southern Nevada. But even if we don't, each of our fire departments are so progressive. I mean, they're really, really progressive as far as innovations go. And all that stuff. If they've got the money, they'll go for it. More often than not, it's just a budgetary issue. And so, but county, city, Henderson, North Las Vegas, all of them are crazy progressive in trying to be more and more innovative, to do more and more by way of serving their jurisdictions. So there may not be a glaring need for that council yet, but I think I think it'd be welcome. But I guess what I'd say is this: is that if any of the agencies say, "Hey, look, I'm not sure you like totally need that," we're kind of doing that already. You know, they meet regularly. They still have they still have unified command meetings.
Yep.
You know, for the different agencies. You know, they all come together, and so there's a kind of a de facto council.
Good.
You know, within that, and like I said, there's an absolute, you know, total. They sell out to innovation and the like.
Yeah.
They really do go for it.
A good commitment to whatever it's going to take to make it more efficient, serve more people. Well, John, thank you so much for your service in the fire in the fire service, right? And all of your leadership here in the community. As we transition away from the fire service and into TBI, is there anything else you want to add to the discussion?
On the fire side?
Yeah, on the fire side, and then we'll transition to how you made your way to UNLV.
I guess what I would say is, whether it be fire or police, I would encourage, you know, the citizens to, you know, maybe show a little more grace, you know, and try to, to work with or not against, you know, fire or police.
Yeah.
Because if the public knew just how ordinary, you know, these people are, you know, they're your neighbors. They're just regular people, you know, with spectacularly, you know, irregular jobs.
Right.
You know, they have anxieties, they have depressions, they have these setbacks, they have their own certainties, you know, about, you know, do I let my daughter go out with these friends or do I not let them go out? Do I,
Right.
you know, they're not awash in money, so they have to think about, you know, budgets for their families like everybody. They have the same challenges and anxieties as everybody else. I think television and movies makes it look like we're way more put together than we actually are.
Yeah.
You know, and so I say that to say, you know, smile at, you know, a firefighter or a cop, and, you know, say hello, you know, be friendly, you know. It'll go so far because, again, they're ordinary people who they want friends just like anybody else.
Yep. Yeah, that reminds me, flashback moment, I think it was 2021. Yeah, it was after, or 2022, it was after COVID. Okay, and we're finally coming out to events, and we had an MLK Day parade in the city of Las Vegas, and I went with some friends, with my friend Brent. We went to go get some food at Greens and Protein, and there's some local police officers sitting down having lunch. So as soon as we got our food, we just asked if they could join us, if we could join them, and we just had lunch with them, and we just talked. And then afterwards, they're like, "What made you guys want to approach us?" We're like, just, you know, we're all here in our community. It's Las Vegas. We're here for the MLK Day parade. We know that cops have this thing. We both have had our own relationship with cops that would never make us want to come have lunch.
Right.
But because of all of that, we're like, oh, where do we sit? Oh, let's go talk to these guys.
Right.
It would be a good way to continue to build community.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. They tell bad jokes. You know, they're regular.
Right.
They really are spectacularly normal.
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, there's a reason why folks put themselves in the line of fire, whether, you know, all sorts of fires, to, you know, be of service. And a lot of times it's not just because of I need money to take care of my family or for political power. It really is for something way more meaningful than that.
And, you know, and on top of that, there is no such thing as a fully developed firefighter or police officer, because you're constantly maturing. You know, in the job, you know, and there's always something you didn't know, or you thought you knew better than you did, or didn't know as well as you thought. You just don't stop. I know more about the fire service now than I do when I think.
Makes sense.
Because I'm still maturing and thinking about it. I think about my incidents. I think about my clashes like that. I think about it differently now. You know, to whereas if I got back in the fire service now, I'd be a far better chief, you know, than I was when I left. You know, in 21. And so I say that to say that you are not looking at a fully developed, you know, firefighter or police officer or EMT. You're just not. You're looking at somebody who's growing.
Yeah.
You know, and if you expect them to be fully polished all the way around in every sphere, you're gonna be disappointed.
Oh yeah, well you'll be disappointed by any human being if you expect any human being to be extremely polished, right? And that now that's not me saying okay, apologize away or justify all of the reasons why somebody's not polished, but no matter who you look at, there's gonna be some kind of blemish, and it's normal. And so I think cancel culture kind of got us away from that for a while, right? Like overly canceling people. I think there's a balance there, holding people accountable versus saying, you don't belong in our community anymore.
Right.
That's such a hardcore thing to say. We don't even like we say that to people who go to jail, but we let them come back, right? And that's a whole other conflict that folks have.
Yeah, in fire and police, you have to be good at everything.
Yeah.
So as a black man, I'm good at talking to other black people. But I got to be good at talking to white people too, and Hispanic people and Asian people. I've got to be good at talking to rich people and poor people, conservatives and liberals. And so being accessible to every possible demographic, you got to grow into that. You just don't own that from the jump.
And I think that's interesting you say that because probably experienced in fire, but more so experienced in the police force, and that is, black officers in the police force, right? Knowing how to, speak to all of the different pockets. And it's interesting because, like, the first set of black police officers, they probably were thinking what you just said, like, let me know how to talk to rich people, poor people, black people, and white people. And they're entering a space where not all police officers even thought of that way. They were like, oh, we're gonna talk to black people this way, poor people that way, white people this way. And I bring this up because the irony as we talk about, community citizens having grace for our police officers is it will be the same black community members that will have a great deal of strife against the police department, but also more specifically, I'm not talking generally for all people of a certain race. I'm just talking about some of the pockets we have within our different communities, and one of those pockets in the black community is this anti-police department energy, and it even is felt by the black police officers. And I just learning that observation this year was really eye-opening, and I still don't know what to make sense of it yet, because you'd have police officers who, like in your case with your dad, generation over generation, go out of their way to enter spaces to be of service to community members who will never thank them, or maybe even spit at them for that. How did you experience stuff like that? Did you see other people that you grew up with experience stuff like that, and how did they, make sense of it?
So are you asking if I experienced bad behavior directed at me in the public? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but and I would be surprised, honestly, if you got a lot of that.
Not a lot, but it happens.
Okay.
It happens.
How did you make sense of it, and did you see other folks, especially in other agencies, deal with that, and how did they make sense of it, or did people come and ask you, for your advice on dealing with that?
Well, I don't know if I've seen anybody ask advice for it.
Okay.
And it might be because it's so varied. I think what we do is we tell each other our stories and what we think we learned from it.
Yeah.
What we think we learned from it, because we might have learned the wrong thing. So one of my examples is that I was a new paramedic, and there was a homeless guy at the US 95 off ramp at Cheyenne. And so I go, get, to the side. He's laying, sprawled out on the ground. And I'm like, hey, sir, are you okay? How are you doing? Can I get you to sit up, or maybe can I get you to stand up? And he responds, I don't take no orders from no niggers. Whew. Out of nowhere.
Wow.
So then now my captain, wiry little white dude, he's like full MAGA now, but just nicest, kindest person, on the planet. But he's a no nonsense guy. He grabs that guy, yanks him up, and says, "You don't talk to me." He just read him the riot act right then and there.
Oh man.
And
wow.
So my jaw just dropped at that. And so my takeaway from that is this. He called me, nigger, whatever. But what would I look like allowing, and I don't mean to be pejorative or derisive of him, but what would I look like letting somebody who's kind of sitting in his own urine affect me, and who I am? How small must I be? Because I care about what he said. Right.
It just kind of rolled. It didn't even get to the shoulders.
Because to react would have made me look like, to me, just stupid.
Yeah.
And so, so I treat him like normal. I got my job to do. I'll do it, but he can't. He can't affect me like that. And I'd like to think that I would do that no matter who said it, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Okay.
I don't think I could have gone into a house on Queensridge, and have them say that to me, because I might have gotten a little prickly.
Yeah, totally. Because then also it'd be like, man, if it wasn't me and if it was somebody else in my shoes, I gotta make sure this doesn't happen again.
Right. So that happens. So what we do is, I bring that story up,
Yeah.
To young firefighters and the like, and and I just explain to them. So look, if you really, really, really want to be a professional, there's a saying that goes, you can tell a person, if they have class by what they consider beneath them. Mm-hmm. Person who has class, and you can tell by what they consider beneath them. And the other thing that I learned, and I teach a lot, was that you really can't take crap off of anybody. So I mean that by when you go to the ER, you can't take crap off the doctor. You can't take crap from a police officer. You can't take crap in it from. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think you can trust anybody that you disrespect. I just don't think so.
Yeah.
And so I tell them, for the sake of your role, the badge, also, there has to be a line of respect that they can't cross. You cannot let them cross. And I said, but now the second part of that is this: you must treat people better than they deserve to be treated.
Yeah.
Not treat them the way they deserve to be treated. Anybody can do that, but the varsities are the ones who can treat people better than the way that they deserve to be treated. And so that's something I've taught. With fire, police. When I taught leadership academies like that. And that to me, those are the two of the main golden rules. You can't take shit off nobody.
Yeah.
But you got to treat people better than they deserve to be treated.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Would you ever go back?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would. I miss it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I still have dreams about being in fire stations and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
All the time.
Oh, man, that's amazing.
I'll probably have one tonight.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We'll be doing a podcast at the fire station when that happens.
Yeah.
Talk about the in between from 2021 retiring to where we're at now, 2025, or at least we met in 2022, right?
Uh-huh.
So it was not that far after your retirement. What happened in that gap?
So, Bo Bernhardt, who was the then vice president of UNLV in the Office of Economic Development, he and I have known each other. Well, he knew me before I knew him because I was one of the older kids playing soccer. So he knew me when I was like 16, so he would have been 12.
Okay.
Knowing me, whatever. And I was good, and I was, playing on good teams, all this like that. And so there was, big kid, little kid dynamic, in the way I played soccer. And then we ended up playing adult league together. After he, finished playing in Harvard and pro ball, whatever. We played adult league together for about a dozen years.
Nice.
And we just got to be, better and better friends. And so when I was in the fire service and doing all that work in the social services space, I'd be like, hey, Bo, can I talk to you about this? Mm-hmm. Because he's, a doctorate in sociology, who also has a bachelor's in psychology.
Yep. And he was at IGT at the time when you're like Institute Gaming and Technology, or he did something at UNLV where he really innovated. Okay.
So he was there when I was asked a question about my program projects. Mm-hmm. What do you think? What's your advice, whatever? And so. So now we're being kind of like professional collaborators, at that point. And so when I went to retire, after I retired, he was neck deep in the work of getting this grant called the Tourism and Business Igniter, which the goal of that was to do two broad things. One was to diversify the tourism industry.
Yeah.
So UNLV was being charged with two things.
Yeah.
Diversify the tourism industry, help get more sports tourism, help get more cultural tourism, help get medical tourism in there. Anything that adds new tourism amenities to Las Vegas, that was the first leg.
Right.
The second leg was to try to get more beneficiaries of tourism. Whereas, how do we get more mom and pop, businesses? How do we get neighborhoods, being able to benefit from the tourism traffic that comes into Vegas?
Yeah.
And so he wanted me to be one of the project directors in that second space. Mm-hmm. And so it was funny as I'd like, look, I know nothing about business or like that. He goes, you'll be fine. Okay. And so brings me the project and the most fortuitous side of it was that the team I was walking into with you and Lizette and
Dr. Marta.
Dr. Martin, Gary, Carrier. I mean, those were all varsity level heavy hitters all the way around. And so it was easy to get in, and Clay T. White, it was easy to get in and figure out a way to fit in, with that group, because whatever our talent was, we also had the unspoken, commandment of thou shalt give a damn.
Yeah.
So to the degree that you gave a damn about somebody or somebodies in the community, you were gonna be all right in that space. And so I came armed not with knowledge, but with a lot of give a damn, and some experience. I had some experience, and a lot of give a damn, and I was with a bunch of other people who had knowledge, experience, and lots of give a damn. So my knowledge had to come up, but my give a damn, kind of fit in all, straight away.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think there's definitely a lot of stories that we could get into. I didn't realize how much time we spent talking about just the fire service experience. I think it was about an hour, which is incredible. Okay. I love that. One of our Igniter members is here, Ms. Deidre, and from Black Silk Developments. And if you read when we get a chance to review the reports together, the work that she did with the Property Coalition, I think is definitely one of my favorite things. I mean, there's so many. Literally on the report that I emailed you, there's like 20 plus favorite things that I put in the report, and I said, here's the top 3. If you want the 20, go to the appendix, and the top one in there is the work about aligning all the property owners, and more so, bigger than that, about cooperation over competition. That was a big tenet of the work we did here.
The thing about Deidre is she may be mean as a rattlesnake, but she has a high degree of give a damn, for the community and the people around her.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she does. All right, John, I'm going to go set us up to end up this live stream. We're going to have many more conversations, I think, like this one.
Can we talk about Deidre a little more?
Why don't you give us a quick 30, because I got to physically get up to our equipment to press buttons.
I had to physically get on the opposite side of the tables from her as I leave.
But, leave us with, I guess, kind of just like some parting words. Leave us with some parting words. It could be about TBI, it could be about fire service. And we'll have more conversations soon.
Here's what I would say, and this is kind of a pivot into, something totally different. What I think I had an epiphany on this one particular topic, in that I keep hearing people rail about DEI, and I think I was persuaded to think the way they thought about it, as if it was a way to advance blacks and females and the like. But then I started thinking about it more. It's really not the case. To me, what DEI is, it was a way to break the stranglehold that mediocre, white guys had on all the promotions and all the jobs and the like. And so what I mean by that is this, within the white males dominate, the culture. But within that, there's 3 groups. One of them are the white dudes who really have their stuff together, like your Bo Bernhards and people. They've got their stuff together, and they never complain about DEI. And then on the opposite end, you've got people who are more self-reflective, saying, like, it's not DEI is the reason why I can't get this job or get this promotion. I just didn't put in the work. I didn't put in the time. They're self-reflective. In the middle are the mediocre ones who for centuries just were promised access to the jobs and education and the like, without hesitation or reservation. And so what I think I see is that there is, mediocrity is in the ascent, and I say that so that people who are concerned about DEI should not be too dispirited, because it's really about, galvanizing the people who are either A, self-aware, or B, have their stuff together, and stop apologizing, for DEI, because it was never set up, not to my, I won't say it like, whether it was set up, to advance women or minorities like that may have been the case, but in practical application, what it really ended up doing is just broke the stranglehold of mediocre guys being able to get those spots, because what you didn't see is you didn't see mediocre women, become captains or chiefs or partners in a law firm. You didn't see mediocre blacks, or minorities, ascent in a corporation or an organization. And so it really was not the case, to bestow gifts on mediocre women and minorities. They had to be exceptional, and so you had exceptional minorities and exceptional women, who were partnered with exceptional white guys, and that's what the mediocre, guys were screaming about. So I say all that to say, in an encouragement fashion, keep striving, keep grinding, do everything you can, to be that exceptional person, no matter what space you're in, because we'll find each other again. These days will pass, and as mediocrity always does, it kind of recedes, because usually mediocre guys are too lazy to keep up a fight, and so we will find each other again. That's my thought.